Alrighty, I believe we are currently on. Welcome everybody to hour 9 of the Showing with Logic 24-hour podcast in hopes of raising even more money for Engineers Without Borders. Looks like we've already reached our goal of 2,000. We're at 2176 now. Does not mean you have to stop. It just means we reached our first goal. We'll set another one. Let's say 3,000. If we can get to about 2,500 by the end of this, Veen and I will take off our shirts and make out for you guys. No, I'm just...
What? Oh, we're not... Well,
Well, I don't think we can feasibly do it.
Well, you kind of made me a promise here,
oh, well,
so...
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just use the webcam, because
all right, I like it.
That's what we can do. All right. So, welcome, Veen and Lloyd. Thank you for being on the charity. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So you're a YouTuber, obviously. You make some fairly decent videos as far as like the technical stuff of philosophy goes.
Thanks.
So just real quick, because I've never really been clear on this. Did you major in philosophy? Did you minor in it? What exactly is your level right now?
Well, first it's venaloid, like vegetable.
Gotcha.
That pronunciation of the E. Secondly, it's kind of funny. My major is currently, and I'm almost done with it, mechanical engineering. I think I've taken 1 or 2 formal philosophy classes, but really it's kind of just a thing that I've dabbled in and kind of looked around. I'm kind of in the same boat as theoretical bullshit was or is, depending on, if you count him still on YouTube anymore, where, he just kind of gets into it. He kind of listens to people and figures stuff out, but it's hard to really classify him or me as a philosopher or belonging to any sort of specific philosophical camp. I might say, yeah, I agree with this idea more or less, but I wouldn't call myself, I don't know.
So
it's formal training, not so much.
I guess it would be fair to say then that, like him, you have sort of a natural talent for the group. Now, I know you're going to be modest and be like, I don't know what you're talking about, but don't give me that bullshit. So
Fine, I'm awesome. You caught me.
There you go. That's how we work here. We all have to have our heads up our asses. That's why. So anyway, you do a lot of videos about different subjects. One of the main focal points seems to be religion. That seems to be one of the main things that you delve into. So I've seen you take on a wide variety of different levels of apologetics, from just your basic sort of small-time preacher who's saying a lot of really weird stuff to a small crowd to like William Lane Craig. What would you say is like the most interesting argument you've ever heard as far as apologetics is concerned? Something that actually made you think quite a bit.
I think that's a pretty easy one, which is, it's going to sound funny, but presuppositional apologetics. And the reason for that is because it really does cut to the core of epistemology, of what can be known, of all this stuff that we kind of take for granted. And when you're not familiar with it, it's like, you just think, whoa, holy crap, I never thought of this. This Christian guy did, and he's beaten me down with it. Like, I have no idea. But and that made me pause and think for there was a whole year where I'm just sitting there trying to hammer it out and figure this out, and theoretical bullshit had already done some stuff on that, blah, blah, blah. But eventually you get to the point where you realize, hey, wait a minute, the apologist, the Christian apologist usually, is, saying all this stuff about my worldview. You can't know this. How do you know that? You have no basis for this. But then, wait a minute, this applies to your worldview too. It applies to all worldviews. That's one of the scary things about a lot of these arguments, is that they cut to the core of every single worldview, no matter what. If you ask enough questions of why this, okay, why that, why that, why that, you go back to a point where at some point, that's just because. Like when a little child asks you, why is the sky blue? Oh, because light scatters this way. Oh, well, why does light scatter that way? Well, because of this. Well, why is that the case? And she says, I don't know. It just kind of is.
Sort of gets to the strange point where if you keep trying to answer their questions, you're just being like, because some things are and some things are not. That's just That's just how it is. Why? What? Because if it wasn't like that, then like I could just wave my hand and a giant duck with a man's head could just appear next to you and start speaking Spanish. That's why. It's stupid.
Why is that so ridiculous? Yeah, I know.
but
yeah, and that's the thing, which is apologists, and again, theoretical bullshit pointed this out. Apologists are the ones saying that you have to be able to account for every single thing in this infinitely regressing chain for a worldview to make sense. I'm not saying that. They are. And if they want to make that claim, that's fine, but they can't, as theoretical bullshit said, cash that philosophical check. So until you realize that it is a double-edged sword, it's one of the most, I don't know, debasing, strange arguments I'd ever heard. But yeah, eventually you realize, like, wait, this is just ridiculous. And then, of course, you have Eric Hovind, who is basically outright saying, I assume I'm correct, therefore I'm correct. It's like the cheapest, dirtiest way you could possibly make that argument.
Yeah, there does seem to be, because here's the thing, that argument has been around for a long time, much longer than like Psi 10 has brought it around. Like I think it even started with Islam. I think it predates Christian apologetics, and it was first started by Islamic apologetics, if I remember correctly. That was back in about 1200 AD. Something along those lines. And essentially, it was an Islamic philosopher who started to delve into epistemology. And he was doing this pretty much on his own. And he started to say, there's really nothing that I can say that I know. And he was really getting into a very Cartesian type of skepticism. Mm-hmm. But then he just stops at a certain point and goes, oh, I got it. God's giving me the information. That's how it's working. And then that started to spread a little bit among Muslims, but it wasn't exactly a very convincing argument. It was more something that, as it's used today, as far as I'm concerned, it's used more to reaffirm beliefs than it is to convince people otherwise. But these days it's kind of been hijacked, and it's used less as an argument and more as a rhetorical attack that I find. Yeah, like if you watch Psi's videos where he gives like lectures on pre-sup, he even says, this argument is not for atheists. This argument is for you. This argument is so that you can sit down and make the argument that you know God exists, and they do too, and that's the end of it. That's the point of it.
And then you can go jerk off in real life as opposed to just your mind.
Right. It's like, stop spending all that time debating and just say, I'm right, you're wrong, then go fuck off and do something else.
Yeah, that was kind of the end of, like, I forget, it was like a 2-year-old video I made, freshman year of college or something, where at some point, I think it might have been Psi or Eric in, his Creation Today show, basically said exactly that, and I go, I never thought of it that way. You're right, I'm wrong. Fascinating.
Such a convincing argument. I don't know why we don't use it for everything.
It's like, it's so deep of an argument that it's just resurfaced on the other side of the ocean. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the weirdest ones. Though I do agree, it is one that is fascinating to those who don't know a whole hell of a lot about, say, epistemology. Because when I first saw this argument cropping up, I saw a lot of people who were making counters to it that were very sloppy, very flawed. It was something that they hadn't heard before. They didn't really know how to answer it, and so they just kept falling into every rhetorical trap that argument and its script these days is set up for them to fall into. And it confused a lot of people. But lately there's been sort of a resurgence of an understanding of the argument to the point where actual valid answers can be given, such as, is there anything that you know absolutely to be true? Yes. What? I'm not God. How do you know that? Because I'm not omniscient. How do you know that? Because if I wasn't, then I'd know that.
Yeah. Are you getting that? Out of curiosity, are you getting that from the user Known No More on YouTube?
I actually knew about that counter, and then I saw him use it, and I'm like, because he put a video up and he's a fairly well-known guy at this point as far as philosophy goes, a lot of people are going to catch on. So that's going to be very helpful to a lot of people. And lo and behold, like weeks after I saw him make a video on that, I would see hangouts of people doing debates with presuppositionalists saying that exact thing. And it just threw those guys straight off. They're like, well, okay, but you don't actually know that for certain because you could be wrong. How could I be wrong about that? Yeah, well,
yeah,
really
that's fantastic. Yeah, and I want to take this time to give No More a plug or a shout out or both, because like I tried to do my little series on presuppositional apologetics. It wasn't that great in retrospect, but No More, he just like one after another. I think it's like 8-part series. He just nailed it, and I'm sitting there like, I thought I could compete with that.
It was a nice series. When I watched it, it was like each part is not that long. It's only about 15 minutes apart. It's fairly easy to understand. You just have to make sure you're actually listening, because he does kind of go through the arguments fairly quickly.
You don't listen to it while folding laundry or anything.
Right. You don't listen to it in the background while you're playing video games or making a sandwich. It's not a good idea. It's an educational experience. It's not, yeah. But it also sort of shows the point that when you know more about this subject, it's a lot easier to find out why it seems to confuse people, because there are people who don't know about this subject. In my experience, there's too many people who are sort of like laymen when it comes to actually having a philosophical discussion. And as a result, just mistakes get made frequently. And presup seem to help point out that there is at least some amount of study as to concepts that needs to be done before you choose to engage with something. Yeah. Like, you can go ahead and have a stalemate with a presupper by saying, yeah, you say God exists, but I still haven't seen any evidence of it. But you guys aren't even addressing each other on the same level. Like, he's addressing you on a purely epistemic level. You're already presuming empiricism and then addressing his argument from there. And then it's just going to be a stalemate. You're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, even just from the world of, philosophical debates. Even just simpler is the idea of having premises followed by a conclusion. I've been surprised how unknown that is. I've talked to friends who I've known for years, and it's only after they've taken a philosophy class in college do they come back to me and be like, wow, I never, realized about the whole premises conclusion. It just makes it so clear. Whereas, usually people just kind of think as a philosophical discussion as well. Is my green your red? Ooh, spooky. It's like, and, I don't know what to do about that.
So as far as premises go, it's even extremely useful just to know that that's a possibility of framing an argument, because it really helps to dissect an argument when you're trying to understand it. One of my favorite things to do whenever I'm having an argument with somebody, especially on YouTube in like comment sections, because it tends to shorten it up a lot, because in comment sections a lot of stuff can be said. So instead, just break it down premise by premise to conclusion, and then point out where there's an invalidity or something that's unsound, and say that's out. So therefore your conclusion doesn't follow. Or your conclusion didn't follow in the first place because that didn't make any sense. It's easy to do, and it usually makes people rage quit really quickly. Because obviously there's the other issue. Most people don't kind of backtrack from arguments that they make. That's the general feel of most online communication. When you have an opinion, when you make an argument, and somebody else refutes it, you're really not just going to accept that they refuted it automatically. You're just going to kind of leave it alone for the most part. That tends to be how it goes, as far as
I find that you're right if they're being like really mean and pissy about it. The thing I try to do, even with, in fact, there's a semi-recent comment thread discussion I had with Creationist on one of my videos, and throughout the whole exchange, I tried to be very, very polite, and I like to think I succeeded. But basically, the idea is, you're right. They'll tend to abandon the argument if you're all pissy about it. But if you tend to phrase it more in kind of an asking way, like, well, what about this? Or if you're just overall nice about it and very clear about what you're saying without much distraction, it's surprising how much people respond well to that. And I think that's something that the internet in general just doesn't quite get. And I'm not saying I'm perfect in that respect, but at least I'm trying to understand that. There's a scene in the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, maybe you know it, where Steve Martin, he goes to get his rent-a-car and it's not there. So he goes up to the smiling lady behind the counter and says, I want you to wipe that fucking smile off your goddamn face. I want a goddamn car right fucking now. And what does she say? You're fucked. And that's when my dad, when I was watching this video of this movie years ago, my dad leans over to me and says, just remember, Alex, you never get anywhere by being an asshole.
I mean, it's true. People do tend to respond better in arguments when you're, I guess, treating them with honey rather than salting the shit out of them.
I would say just don't do any honey or salt whatsoever. Maybe honey them a little, but like even if you just ditch the whole food, it's just like if you're just straightforward, you say your argument, you don't be mean about it, you don't be pissy about it. It's like even that, you know, you may have to take a few hits of them still being mean to you, but eventually they kind of level out and they realize, okay, this person's just talking about the argument. I can do that. Or they can't and they're assholes and you just ignore them. I don't know, but...
See, I find that there's a big reason, because while they will respond better to that, in general, the response isn't a concession of perhaps the entirety of the argument. Maybe they'll concede a point or two, but generally they'll still retain the original belief that's being argued about. And I think part of this has to do with identity, if that makes any sense. Like, if someone believes something, that belief becomes a part of their identity as a person. And so when that belief is then challenged in some way, their entire identity is in a way being challenged in their minds. And so they react defensively. And so it takes longer for something that someone holds to be a part of them to let it go in that sense.
Oh, yeah. No, that makes sense. I feel that I have that same thing. I mean, I'm sure that's just a human thing where if I have an argument that I've liked for a long time and someone refutes it, it's hard for me, and I don't always do it, to concede the point right there in the comment section. I have to sit back and think about it and kind of accept it, because you're right. That is just how people seem to work, even, you know, despite your best efforts.
Yeah, nobody's immune from this. The difference, though, is that perhaps if you look at academia, they usually don't have protracted arguments about one very particular point that was very obviously refuted. Generally, when it comes to like academics, those who are well versed in philosophy, they're aware that they have to maintain in their mind that they could be wrong about what they're arguing about. Mm-hmm. And so before they write responses, they have to sit back, they have to think, they have to say, am I going to sound like an idiot if I start defending this point even further? So there's that, but there's really no like holding of any sort of accountability in, for instance, a YouTube comment section or in an internet forum or any other sort of online communication. So there's nothing holding them back from going, I don't really want to look like an idiot. My reputation's on the line here, or anything like that. It's just, I'm going to respond and say, you're a dickhead. So that it definitely is an issue that I find could be remedied, at least in part, by less allowable anonymity on the internet. And I know this is kind of a contentious issue because anonymity is also treasured in other aspects. I guess it just kind of depends on what you value. Do you value people not acting like rabid wolves, or do you value people figuring out that what they say is going to have an effect on their life in some way?
I see what you're saying. I think the whole anonymity thing and, you know, what you value, I see that point very much so with politics, of course, where, you know, a specific politician who can actually fuck up your life does something ridiculous or says something ridiculous, tries to implement something. It's like, well, yeah, obviously you want to know who that guy is and not vote for him. The internet, I can see it, you know, retaining more anonymity because, you know, it may just be part of learning to communicate with people and part of maturing. Once again, I'm not saying I'm immune to any of this. I'm talking as if I'm talking down to everyone, but I'm part of this crowd, which is, I think part of it is just kind of learning how to check yourself like that. And, you know, if you use your full name on the internet and everyone knows who you are, it's like, well, now I got that with me for the rest of my life, and I can't really fix it, so to speak.
So before we continue, I'd like to point out that we have currently made $45 just by sitting here and bullshitting, which is nice. Bear in mind, guys, let's see. Every hour I like to figure out some sort of incentive to get people to donate a little bit more. So let's see. I already said 2,500, and we'll take our shirts off and start making out. So that's out. Let's see what we're at. 2221 so far. If we get to 2,300, Veen and I will sing a song for you. That sounds agreeable to you.
Are you sure that's not going to scare people away?
It might, but at least we'll make like $80 more out of it.
You got to think of something that people will like actually want us to see. Want to see that.
Well, I think us embarrassing ourselves is definitely something that tends to incentivize donators.
That's true. I edit out all the dumb stuff I do on camera. No one gets to see that.
No one gets to see me being stupid unless you pay me money. Or you donate to a charity.
Yeah, no one gets to see you do stupid stuff unless you pay money. America, TV,
America, capitalism. So obviously you've delved into other subjects as well on your channel. One of the ones that I personally hold near and dear to my heart, my main mode of study, I suppose, is general morality, meta-ethics, all that kind of stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know if you've explicitly stated it, but it seems to me that your view, at the very least, normatively, is utilitarianistic. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I guess so. I think I would lean in that direction. But as I said early on in this interview, it's a little hard because I've, like I said, not really studied formal philosophy that much. And so I'm a little wary of signing into one category or another without actually having sat down and studied it in full. But yeah, I think utilitarian, at least it's something that I would like to defend from silly attacks as I have in other videos. Like, Peter Kraft, one of his Prager University videos, he basically said, if utilitarianism is true, then why would people hide Jews in their basements from the Nazis? I mean, that's just impractical. And I said, well, no, they're making a mental, emotional trade-off where they say, okay, I could either let these people die and feel horrible that I did nothing to save them, or I could hide them in my basement. And, you know, obviously that's taking a risk, but would it be worth the comfort of knowing that I saved them? And for some people, the answer is yes. Other people, the answer is no. But ultimately, that's a very practical, you know, trade-off kind of thing that they're reasoning through. And that's what motivated some people to hide Jews, some people to not.
I would agree that there's a level of self-gratification as well as I suppose ideals held in the sense of doing things utilitarianistically in the sense of hiding Jews from the Nazis. In my view, utilitarianism seems to be very cut and dry. This is kind of my issue with it. So we'll see if you understand where I'm coming from. It's very black and white. It's very, this is right and this is wrong because of the math. Essentially, we've done the math. This amount of people will live if we do this action. Less amount of people will live if we don't. So we will do it, and we will call that good. And it seems to me that morality, in general, is a little more complicated than something that could just be calculated that much. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, of course, the problem with morality, there are several just in general, like the is-ought gap, for example, which is basically says, okay, what about this is the case, translates to, therefore, that ought to be the case. That you really have a hard time bridging that kind of gap. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm trying to fix my video.
All right. I want to apologize to everyone or if or that my video has been cutting out. I'm not sure why, but I'm told the audio is okay, so whatever. So yeah, there's the is-ought gap, which is kind of an undercut to a lot of morality. And ultimately, it's kind of like presuppositional, where you could say, okay, this is what we should do, but hang on, why should that be the standard of what we should do? And so on and so forth. So to a large extent, I can kind of see where you're coming from, which is like, well, you know, who says that this many lives should be saved in exchange for that many lives? Like, why should that be the case? And it is kind of a very fundamental problem with moral philosophy, not, you know, the little I know of it, which is it's really hard to kind of say what should be the standard for what we should do. And you could, I think, potentially get an infinite chain of, well, should this be, should that be, should that be? And it's very tricky to pin down.
It is, as far as the is-ought gap goes, I think in the sense that you were talking about it, used in a sort of ethically presuppositional sort of way. I think that's sort of an extent of its usage, in the sense that when someone asks me, for instance, why murder is wrong, murder as it's legally defined anyway, because obviously you can kill people in self-defense and we don't find that wrong. If someone asks me why murder is wrong and I were to give them any one reason, like it's detrimental to society to allow murder, it's detrimental to human well-being to allow murder, it's detrimental to psychology, to one's psychology to murder, there's a bunch of reasons I could give. And then someone could say, yes, but just because it is X does not mean we ought not do it. That doesn't mean that we ought to do it either. So why is it wrong? And to me, that sort of misses the point, because when I give this reason, what you're going to do is you're going to take your values, your personal values, and you're going to figure out which one of these reasons resonates with your value as far as why it's wrong. And then that's sort of your reasoning. The sort of, I guess, mathematical equation as far as why ought we do something or why ought we not do something, it has to do with a fact plus a value equals a conclusion. Fact, murder causes societal decay, say in the sense of there being a lessening of safety. My value is increase in safety, therefore I ought not murder, or I ought not allow people to murder. So when someone asks, well, why ought you have that value? That's sort of the same conclusion that we have with presuppositionalism. It's like, well, I have that value. The question is not why I should have it. The fact is I do. So now I have to deal with it.
Well, then, of course, the question is, what if I value killing people?
Well, then we put you away, obviously. You can hold contradictory values that cause you to value doing things in society at large would usually cause they see as evil, but that's generally not seen as problematic in the sense that the society also holds the value that is contradictory to yours. So by virtue of you having this contradictory value that causes you to value doing horrible things, you're going to be stopped from doing them because of the other people's conflicting values. Of course, this leads into the problem of does more people valuing something make it more right than somebody else valuing something? Mm-hmm. But I don't really see that as a real issue per se, mainly because it's when we're talking about morality, society at large and the world at large, I think is in pretty much agreement with at least some basic values.
Yeah, and that's always comfortable to kind of fall back on in terms of these moral discussions. Like, look, most people get sick to their stomach when they think about killing someone else. I'm not saying that's how it should be for any sort of meta space-time philosophical reason. It's just the fact that most of us value that stuff. And if you start killing us, we are going to fix that.
Absolutely. And in that sense, because there's so many people who would stop somebody from doing these kinds of things, it just turns into this, it's not that might makes right, it's that we think you're wrong, and so we're going to stop you. You could be right, but that's not how we're currently defining morality, so it doesn't make any sense to say you are.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of has to do with just how you define what is right and what is wrong. If you define it in a way, when you have a definition that you're working with, a working definition, then you can easily say what you ought not do in accordance to your definition. And through that, I don't really find too much of an issue with figuring out what we ought to do or ought not do, so long as the world in general is in agreement with some things. Like, for instance, I've noticed the phenomenon that there has never really been a moral statement I've ever heard of, whether it be immoral or moral, that it has nothing at all to do with human well-being. As vague as that term is, it all has to do in some way with that. So it seems to me that that's something that's included into the category of morality.
Yeah, I think I tried to touch on that in a video I had called Moral Thought Experiments. I don't think I explicitly said it like you did, but yeah, it would be very odd to us to have a system of morality that says it's immoral for a meteorite to hit the moon, or it's immoral for a tree to fall over facing north. Like, what does that even mean? The only way we can really envision morality is having something to do with suffering, usually human suffering, but it could be animal suffering, non-human persons, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it does seem to come down to, as you said, human well-being. I would just say suffering in general.
See, I wouldn't say suffering in general, and the reason is because of this thought experiment that was posed to Sam Harris's Moral Landscape Challenge. Say you live in a society where there is no suffering, but the reason behind this is because there's a benevolent dictator that has taken away everyone's free will to cause suffering. That wouldn't be a world we would want to live in, I don't think. So it can't just be about suffering. If we can take away suffering entirely and yet still find it to be a world we don't want.
I've not heard that before, but let me just see if I can understand this. Basically, the thought experiment, as you said, is a world in which, through some sort of means, humans' ability to suffer and inflict suffering on others has been taken away, correct?
Right.
And why would we not want to live in that world? It verbally, it just sounds great, but...
It does? Well...
No suffering.
Yeah, but no will.
That's the thing that's interesting, which is, talking about free will, if you're a hard determinist, which is to say you believe that humans are, at base, just, dominoes falling over, they do exactly what the laws of nature would say they do, you can still believe in a kind of, compatibilistic is the word, free will, where you don't feel trapped in your lack of free will because, for example, I cannot predict my own actions. I do not have the software to predict my own actions. And even if I did, I would have to have software to predict the predictive software and so on and so forth in an infinite chain of, one marionette puppeteering the next one up. And so even if the universe or you are completely determined, just like a clock, you will always seem to have free will because you won't quite be able to predict what you will do or what others will do. And so even in the world of absolutely no suffering and, by extension, no free will, you would, I think, still appear to yourself and to others to have free will simply because you cannot predict what you're going to do. So it appears that the decision just comes to you as you make it.
Well, it can appear that way. Remember, with the thought experiment, we're sort of going from the outside looking in. We're relying on our intuitions, our moral intuitions, and our preferences as they are right now. Say we remove the concept of this just being a society and a benevolent dictator, and we have the same situation, except it's heaven, for instance. Lots of philosophers have argued against this as being a preferable version of heaven, mainly because of the identity issue. Are you really you if your will is taken away to do the things that you want to do, even if they're bad?
Yeah, that's a good point, which the user NoelPlum99 made several years ago, which is, what would God have to remove from me to make me compatible with heaven? And of course, like you said, you'd have to remove a lot to the point where, in philosophical terms, you would be what's called psychologically discontinuous, at which point it's really hard to say, well, is that really you?
It sort of becomes the point where is it really a lion if it doesn't want to kill and eat anything? Or is it just kind of like a furry thing? So in that sense, and at least in my sense, because I do believe in a compatibilistic sort of free will, but I don't believe that you can really call it compatibilistic if it is predetermined through the usage of taking away our mechanisms that cause us to have violent urges or urges that cause suffering, or if it is like a chemical thing that's induced into us that prevents us from being able to do these things. It is still predictable because someone is pretty much shaping us to do these actions, or rather to not do these actions. And in that sense, I don't think that would be all that much of a compatibilistic free will. I think that would really just reduce us to automatons.
Well, okay, we could modify the thought experiment slightly and say, well, okay, just assume humans evolved that way, or just assume that after, generation 1, where everyone's brains are rewired, everyone else is just born that way, kind of like original sin, but in a good way. Then what would it be? What if that were just human nature from the very beginning, that we never, whatever brain chemicals make us feel bad just never evolved. We always felt good no matter what we did, assuming we could survive any time like that. Just let's assume that we could. How would that change the philosophical implications for free will? I'm not sure that it would.
Sorry, I just need to let the chat know if they're enjoying the conversation, if they're enjoying the show, to make sure to bear in mind to keep donating.
Oh yeah, I see.
We do need more. Okay, so I still have a problem with this because take for instance the Ricky Gervais movie Invention of Lying. Something that we could easily predict about our behavior is that what you're going to tell me, if lying, for instance, is something that we find to be something that induces suffering of some sort, that's debatable in itself. But just for the sake of argument, lying has been taken away so that no suffering could be inflicted on anybody. So I'm well aware that whatever you tell me is going to be what you know to be true. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be an issue. I'm not going to be suspicious. I'm going to know it. I know that already. So I can predict that, in a sense, whatever you're going to tell me is what you actually think. Uh-huh. And granted, I won't know of another way in which a statement can be said to me where it could not be true and they'll know it not to be true. But that doesn't stop the fact that I can also predict that is what's going to happen. So it's still a predictable thing. It's still a predictable course of events. When I'm not allowed, when I'm not able to actually do an action that I would otherwise do, then I really don't think that we can say that there's any sort of workable free will in here, compatibilistic or not.
Well, again, that gets back to kind of what we started with, which is, would you want to live in that world? And what I said was basically, okay, even if it is completely deterministic, there is no free will, as I think is the case in this universe, well, how would we know? I think everything would appear the exact same way if there were free will. I don't know quite what I'm going to do in the future, but I know I'm not going to jump off a cliff for no reason kind of thing. So there is an element of predictability, but there's still a wide variation, or there's a wide range of possibilities of what I might choose to do, and I won't know it until I do it because I just don't have the software to predict my own brain.
Okay, so
it feels to me like I have free will, even if I don't.
So there's the free will thing, which I'm not really convinced that it really works as far as how you're phrasing it. And then there's also the sense that the sense of identity that's sort of taken away in it as well. Mm-hmm. But there's also let's see if there's another way I can picture this. There was a thought experiment that was done back in the 40s, I think it was, which was made to sort of mock something called hedonistic consequentialism, which is basically a very simplistic form of utilitarianism that says anything that induces suffering is bad, no matter what it is, and anything that induces pleasure is good, no matter what it is, and those are the only two things that matter. And what the guy said for the thought experiment was, okay, so I've created a machine. If you get into this machine, you will experience a virtual reality that is nothing but pure goodness. You feel no suffering whatsoever. You're not going to get out of the machine ever again. You're just going to be in this machine for the rest of your life. And you're going to have a virtual reality where nothing bad ever happens to you. So, would you get into this machine? And if so, how does that make you any better than the simplest of animals, like a pig, who would prefer the exact same thing?
Yeah, I think I've heard something like this before, and yeah, that's a very good question. I personally am not quite sure what I would do. It'd be tempting, but I don't think I would do it.
And that sort of gets into the question of why not? Why would there be an urge not to? If it is all about suffering and pleasure.
Yeah. I can't, it's the thing, which is assuming my memory of this life would be wiped or somehow, or basically I wouldn't mourn the loss of this existence, pleasure machine, of course. It's kind of like in Star Trek or science fiction movies where if you go back in time or someone else goes back in time and they make you never exist in the first place, like they stop your parents from meeting so that you never existed in the first place. The characters in those shows, and if they were in real life, do and would be like, whoa, don't do that. I want to keep existing. And that's kind of the gut reaction. But the thought is, well, hang on, if you never existed in the first place, then you would never suffer not existing. It's kind of like the people who say that life, begins at conception, and how would you feel if you got aborted? Well, I wouldn't, because I would never have existed to have that feeling. So, from a logical standpoint, I would have to say, yes, I would get in the machine. But for some reason, which I cannot logically justify, I feel like I would not.
And what you just outlined there, as far as like people being made to never be born, and that's essentially making it so that they never suffered in life. That brings up another sort of its own philosophy, which I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called antinatalism.
I've heard the word.
Basically what it is that human beings are not morally justified into bringing other human beings into the world. We should no longer have babies, because no matter what, that baby is at some point going to experience suffering. And that's not something that we can justify doing to another human being. To bring them into a world against their will, into a world that's going to induce some form of suffering on them at some point. That's sort of their philosophy. It's based on the same premise of hedonistic consequentialism. And of course, again, in my eyes, it seems entirely too simplistic as far as what we value in life and what we find to be good and what we find to be bad. Like somebody else pointed out an issue with this point of view by producing the needle thought experiment. Say somebody goes through about 35 years of their life, having never had a problem in their life. Everything went well for them. They never even stubbed a toe. But at one point, when they're like 35, they're sewing something, and they accidentally jab themselves with a needle. Is that small amount of suffering enough to say he shouldn't have been born? That's too much.
I think that gets into the question, which I know has been debated in philosophical circles for decades, which is life, taken in net, pleasurable or painful? In other words, going back to the antinatalism thing, if we let another generation be born, in total, are they going to pleasure more or suffer more?
which is something that I don't think anyone can really feasibly measure.
Yeah.
So in general, the arguments as to whether or not it's a good thing as far as the antinatalist side is concerned, it's usually has to do with like pointing out, well, there's wars that go on, there's starvation that goes on, there's poverty that goes on, there's homelessness that goes on, there's all these horrible things that go on in the world. So chances are good, something bad's going to happen. And all that's horrible. We don't want to experience that. So why make anybody else experience it? And since we don't know whether or not they're going to experience it, the safe bet is to make sure they never do. And I personally think that's extremely simple-minded. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it really does deny any other value to life aside from not wanting to suffer.
No, I agree that I definitely don't sign on to that whole, like, let's just not have anyone, let's not risk it. But, but yeah, it's still definitely very interesting. And of course, as you pointed out, you know, how the heck could we possibly gauge the net suffering of a whole group of people like that? I don't know.
Especially what's going to happen in the future. And
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe at some point they'll have world peace. I don't know.
Yeah. And then, like, what did we do? We just missed out, you know, a bunch of, you know, like a huge lopside of pleasure. So definitely trying to predict the future is not something I think we can reasonably consider, unless, of course, you know, there's a nuke at the core of the Earth and we know we're all going to die in 80 years or something. It's like, okay, well.
So all of this conversation sort of, by the way, we are still at 22:21. What is wrong with you guys? Are you guys not enjoying the show? Are you guys not in any way interested in helping more people? Sorry, 22:23. I guess somebody donated $2.
I've actually been, there we go. I actually made a donation just now. I was trying to do that intermittently.
Good. At least we're getting some sort of donation.
Trendsetter.
See, this is one of the problems with 24-hour events is that usually in the first, 6 hours, that's where most of the donations are going to come from. And then it just sort of peters out, and we get, one donation every once in a while from there. Generally because it's late at night and nobody's on anymore, and everybody who was going to make a donation already came. But hopefully that changes the more we give more incentives as far as each hour goes. Especially since it's for a good cause, everybody. It really is. Clean water and energy is something a lot of people need. But to get back to it, the discussion that we have is essentially sort of setting up a discussion as to what is the best normative stance to take to summarize the values that human beings, at the very least, have when they're talking about morality. It's less an attempt to establish sort of a new moral code for everybody to live by, and more an attempt to figure out what our moral intuitions are, in a sense, and figure out whether or not they work or if they don't work.
And that's something I tried to do in a video I made a year or two ago called Moral Thought Experiments, where I kind of approximated step by step our world. You know, the first step is, okay, just imagine there are no humans or no animals to suffer. Let's just imagine it's an earth covered in plants. Is anything that goes on in that world immoral? And I think most of us would say, well, no, if it's just plants, I mean, what would that even look like for morality, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thought is, okay, take it up a step. Let's say that there are, you know, just that plant earth, but there are what we would think of as little Martian rovers that kind of go around and, you know, maybe find the sunniest spot. And, you know, just imagine that we just dump them off somewhere. Like, we're humans, we're living on some other planet. We just dump a bunch of rovers on another planet and let them, you know, compete for sunlight. Would we really say that anything happening on that planet is immoral? Like, if one rover pushes another rover over so it doesn't get any sunlight and it shuts down, you know, is that immoral? Does the rover feel pain or something? And again, I think most of us would say, well, no, it's, you know, just like battle bots.
Which kind of causes us to ask the question, like, if you're a person who's fairly reductionist in nature, we, as we are generally run by nature. That there's no sort of like second mind, so to speak, no sort of soul or anything like that that's driving us. Are we really all that much different from a bunch of rovers driving around and knocking each other over in that sense? And I think the fact that we have the capacity to have values, I think, is one of the things we could say to that. But in the more meta sense, the question arises of, does that even matter in any, I suppose, true sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I will say, I should have said this at the beginning, but what disclaimer for discussions of morality, the question always seems to start off, very interesting, and a lot of ways you could go, and it always seems to end with, I don't know.
Well, it is a discussion that's been had for over like thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
Obviously, you and I aren't going to just settle all morality debates in a 1 hour blog TV session. But there's just a million questions that can be asked about this subject. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm just so very much interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other reason is because, in my view at the very least, there's little else that's more important than establishing a good code to follow, at least for yourself, or if not for other people. It really is something that drives society more than anything, in my view. A society that's technologically advanced, that's morally bankrupt, is not a society that I want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just sort of my take on it. One of the reasons why I'm so in deep, as it were, into the discussion.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm concerned, my current stance is a moral realist stance combined with virtue ethics of normativity. If anybody's confused as to what those are, I will go ahead and provide a link into the chat to help you learn a little bit more as to what that means. But in simplistic terms, it means that I believe it's completely okay for a godless universe to have something called objective morality. And I do believe that our moral actions are driven, at least majoritively, by how we feel we are as a character in doing those actions. Whether or not we see ourselves as a monster, or whether or not we see ourselves as a virtuous person. Very simplistic terms. It's much further analyzed over on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. If anybody's interested, I will provide the link. We have about 5 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. We are at 22:36. It's something. It helps. I know Veniloid made a, or is it? It's Veniloid, right?
Yeah, it's like vegetable.
I know
just call me
donation.
vegetable.
But that's. I enjoyed the hour anyway.
Oh, yeah.
I hope everybody else enjoyed the hour. I hope Veniloid enjoyed himself. But our hour is about up, so I'm going to do wrapping up. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to offer, Veniloid?
Not really. I kind of like this discussion, and I'm really glad that we're doing this kind of charity thing. I actually was organizing my own behind-the-scenes charity kind of like this, but then, conveniently, at the same time I stopped making videos recently, my classes started. This is a nice announcement for everyone who's waiting for me to make videos. My classes ended, at which point I started an independent study. Then I got hired by a nuclear plant out in Michigan, so I had to get housing and a car for there. And I was like, what the heck is going on with my life right now? So, yeah, so that's why I've been away, but I'm really glad to be able to dabble in this stuff again, and this has been really great.
Well, I'm glad I could provide a little bit of entertainment and hopefully some intellectual stimulation for you.
Mm-hmm.
Apologize for everybody being late in getting these links to anybody who's interested, but my computer is extremely slow for some reason. I think I need to get a new antivirus software, because the one I have now is a piece of crap. All right. So, further reading for anybody who's interested. The first link is about moral realism, and the second link is going to be about virtue ethics. Lots of sources also. So
I get this book on tape.
It's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Not only is there this, there's like 100 sources on much more information.
I think I'm just going to get Microsoft Sam to read that to me.
I don't have the time.
Yeah, friggin' my drive to work is an hour both ways, so it's like, well, what else do I do except listen to books on tape?
Definitely a good way to spend your time, instead of just kind of like mindlessly listening to Justin Bieber on the radio.
Oh yeah, as I always do. I mean, you found me out.
I know what you do in your private life.
Maybe if we reached 2,300, we should sing "Baby."
I wouldn't have been averse to that, actually. I would have sectioned it off, and I would have said, you sing these lines, and I'll sing these lines, and we'll make it work.
And we'd have to do it in like the most obnoxious falsetto we could muster.
Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to muster a falsetto anymore, so it just come out as a whisper, baby, baby.
Oh, well, maybe there's always next time.
All right. So, again, thank you, Veniloid, for attending. Thank you to anybody who donated during the hour, and anybody who donated during the entirety of the charity, and anybody who donates in the future. All of it's going to a good cause, and I'm very happy that we not only reached our goal, but we're currently surpassing it. Everybody deserves a round of applause. Very good. This is Big Lundy, and you won't see me again until tomorrow morning, where the Antimatter Bandits will be riffing on Reefer Madness, which will be fun, and I will probably not be in a very good state of mind during that. So, something to look forward to. But that is, I believe, tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the next hour is going to be Logicked for anybody who is... Oh, okay, apparently Veniloid went ahead and told everybody in the chat room.
Yep.
But Logicked is going to be next, and Logicked is being hosted by, let's see here, Kitsch and Maxman. So that should be a fun time for everybody.
Yeah, how many people think that I am Logicked? I've gotten that comment before. I'm not him.
I've gotten a lot of people who actually think that a lot of different people are Logicked. You just look over on YouTube and find people who have like semi-similar voices and be like, that's Logicked right there. How do you know?
Why would he be on another channel? Whatever.
Why would he be on a lesser subscribed to channel with his actual... I don't know.
Are we going to do like a Spartacus thing where everyone's Spartacus now?
I am Logicked. Well, it depends on if Logicked is ever convicted of a crime, and we all have to stand up for him. Of course, given his track record of killing gods and the like, not unlikely.
All right. Well, I think my time is now more than up. So
our time is currently up. So see you guys in the morning, and everybody enjoy Logicked and the rest of the 24-hour event. Thank you again for everybody for coming. This is Big Lundy signing out with Veniloid. 100 AD, something along those lines, and essentially. It was an Islamic philosopher who started to delve into epistemology, and he was doing this pretty much on his own. And he started to say, there's really nothing that I can say that I know. And he was really getting into a very a Cartesian type of skepticism. Mm-hmm. But then he just stops at a certain point and goes, oh, I got it. God's giving me the information. That's how it's working. And then that started to spread a little bit among Muslims, but it wasn't exactly a very convincing argument. It was more something that, as it's used today, as far as I'm concerned, it's used more to reaffirm beliefs than it is to convince people otherwise. But these days, it's kind of been hijacked, and it's used less as an argument and more as a rhetorical attack that I find. Yeah, like if you watch Sai's videos where he gives like lectures on pre-sup, he even says this argument is not for atheists. This argument is for you. This argument is so that you can sit down and make the argument that you know God exists and they do too, and that's the end of it. That's the point of it.
And then you can go jerk off in real life as opposed to just your mind.
Right. It's like, stop spending all that time debating and just say, I'm right, you're wrong, then go fuck off and do something else.
Yeah, that was kind of the end of, like, I forget, it was like a 2-year-old video I made, freshman year of college or something, where...
Alrighty, I believe we are currently on. Welcome, everybody, to hour 9 of the Trolling with Logic 24-hour podcast in hopes of raising even more money for Engineers Without Borders. Looks like we've already reached our goal of 2,000. We're at 2176 now. Does not mean you have to stop. It just means we reached our first goal. We'll set another one. Let's say 3,000. If we can get to about 2,500 by the end of this, Veen and I will take off our shirts and make out for you guys. No, just
what? Oh, we're not. Well,
Well, I don't think we can feasibly do it.
Well, you kind of made me a promise here.
Oh, well,
so,
okay, all right. Well, I'll just use the webcam because
all right,
that's,
I like
that's
it.
what we can do. All right. So, welcome, Veen Lloyd. Thank you for being on the charity. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So you're a YouTuber, obviously. You make some fairly decent videos as far as like the technical stuff of philosophy goes.
Thanks.
So just real quick, because I've never really been clear on this. Did you major in philosophy? Did you minor in it? What exactly is your level right now?
Well, first it's venaloid, like vegetable.
Venaloid, gotcha.
That pronunciation of the E. Secondly, it's kind of funny. My major is currently, and I'm almost done with it, mechanical engineering. I think
never heard as far as apologetics is concerned. Something that actually made you think quite a bit.
I think that's a pretty easy one, which is, it's going to sound funny, but presuppositional apologetics. And the reason for that is because it really does cut to the core of epistemology, of what can be known, of all this stuff that we kind of take for granted. And when you're not familiar with it, it's like, you just think, whoa, holy crap, I never thought of this. This Christian guy did, and he's beaten me down with it. Like, I have no idea. But and that made me pause and think for, like, there was a whole year where I'm just sitting there trying to hammer it out and figure this out, and theoretical bullshit had already done some stuff on that, blah, blah, blah. But eventually you get to the point where you realize, hey, wait a minute, the apologist, the Christian apologist usually, is, saying all this stuff about my worldview. You can't know this. How do you know that? You have no basis for this. But then, wait a minute, this applies to your worldview too. It applies to all worldviews. That's one of the scary things about a lot of these arguments, is that they cut to the core of every single worldview, no matter what. If you ask enough questions of why this, okay, why that, why that, why that, you go back to a point where at some point, that's just because. Like when a little child asks you, why is the sky blue? Oh, because light scatters this way. Oh, well, why does light scatter that way? Well, because of this. Well, why is that the case? And it's just, I don't know. It just kind of is.
Sort of gets into this strange point where if you keep trying to answer their questions, you're just being like, because some things are and some things are not. That's just how it is. Why? What? Because if it wasn't like that, then, like, I could just wave my hand and a giant duck with a man's head could just appear next to you and start speaking Spanish. That's why. It's stupid.
Why is that so ridiculous? Yeah, I know. But yeah, and that's the thing, which is apologists, and again, theoretical bullshit pointed this out, apologists are the ones saying that you have to be able to account for every single thing in this infinitely regressing chain for a worldview to make sense. I'm not saying that. They are. And if they want to make that claim, that's fine, but they can't, as theoretical bullshit said, cash that philosophical check. So, until you realize that it is a double-edged sword, it's one of the most, I don't know, debasing, strange arguments I'd ever heard. But, yeah, eventually you realize, like, wait, this is just ridiculous. And then, of course, you have Eric Hovind, who is basically outright saying, I assume I'm correct, therefore I'm correct. It's like the cheapest, dirtiest way you could possibly make that argument.
Yeah, there does seem to be, because here's the thing, that argument has been around for a long time, much longer than like Sci 10 has brought it around. Like, I think it even started with Islam. I think it predates Christian apologetics, and it was first started by Islamic apologetics, if I remember correctly. That was back in about 1200.
I've taken one or two formal philosophy classes, but really it's kind of just a thing that I've dabbled in and kind of looked around. I'm kind of in the same boat as theoretical bullshit was or is, depending on, if you count him still on YouTube anymore, where, he just kind of gets into it. He kind of listens to people and figures stuff out, but it's hard to really classify him or me as a philosopher or belonging to any sort of specific philosophical camp. I might say, yeah, I agree with this idea more or less, but I wouldn't call myself, I don't know.
So
formal training, not so much.
I guess it would be fair to say then that, like him, you have sort of a natural talent for the group. Now, I know you're going to be modest and be like, I don't know what you're talking about, but don't give me that bullshit. So
Fine, I'm awesome. You caught me.
There you go. That's how we work here. We all have to have our heads up our asses. That's why. So anyway, you do a lot of videos about different subjects. One of the main focal points seems to be religion. That seems to be one of the main things that you delve into. So I've seen you take on a wide variety of different levels of apologetics, from just your basic sort of small-time preacher who's saying a lot of really weird stuff to a small crowd to like William Lane Craig. What would you say is like the most interesting argument you've